Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of October of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the Kupyansk direction, because currently this is the most important and the most interesting direction on this entire special military operation. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, fierce battles and so on, the Ukrainians lost 170 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles including 1 tank, and 1 artillery system. Basically, this is the heaviest losses of the Ukrainians on this front line, the same level of losses we saw a few days ago, to be more precise, on the 5th of October. We haven't received almost nothing from this direction when talking about geolocations. We received just some videos, some messages and notes in Telegram channels from these officers and soldiers on the ground, but the Russians are saying that they launched a very powerful and significant attack from Lyman to the forest lines, and as a result of that attack they managed to penetrate Ukraine's defense belt and to get the line in Sinykovka from the west. So basically they managed to encircle this territory from 3 sides. Furthermore, the Russians continue the pressure on the city from the north, and of course the Ukrainians attack the city from the east. So this area is almost encircled. The Ukrainians were forced to step back. Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources are saying, and the Russian sources confirm this information, that as a result of clashes in this direction, a lot of territory defense brigade of Ukrainian forces have already lost its combat capabilities. For example, the Ukrainians were forced to move from the area 105th Territory Defense Brigade. Furthermore, the Ukrainians were forced to move more brigades, and they were forced to replace them with the fresh forces. And this is very important. When talking about the southern area, the Russians, according to information we have, at least we got this update from some sources on the ground, that as a result of a very powerful, very fast and unexpected attack, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukraine's defense belt and to force the Ukrainian forces to step back from this area in direction of the city by the name of Avdiivka. And this is probably the most important and significant result of Russian offensive operation in Kupyansk direction. The thing is that usually, and the Ukrainians used to rely their defense and their positions on these railways tracks that goes from Kupyansk to the south in direction of Berestova and Novosilovsk and so on. So that was the main Ukrainian defense belt in this area. The Russians during the previous days made a significant number and attempts to attack the Ukrainian positions in direction of Kislovka, Kotlerovka, but all those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians, and basically the Russians couldn't bypass and cross the railway. So that's why this was the most important defense belt for the Ukrainians. But somehow the Russians managed to concentrate their forces on the south of Kislovka, Kotlerovka in these forests, and these 3 lines in this forest, and as a result of an unexpected attack they managed to cross the railways and to attack the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian forces among these 3 lines and trenches, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back in direction of the city Avdiivka. And currently the Russians are trying to dig in deeper to prepare their positions and to reinforce this area. And from this perspective, the Russians managed to achieve at least 2 significant benefits. The first one is that the Russians managed to cross the railways and managed to dig in deeper. The Ukrainians made few counter-offensive operations, but the Russians managed to repel every single of them. And currently the Russians have the bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of these railways. The second bridgehead the Russians have in the area of Novosilovsk, but when talking about this area, the situation is very difficult. The Ukrainians have controlled the city around, so there are no chances for the Russians to develop their positions in this area. And this is the second bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of the railways. The second thing that the Russians managed to achieve is that currently they're trying to concentrate their forces on the south, on the bottom, from the cities, from the Kislovka-Kotlerovka area. The Russians try to concentrate, and as soon as they complete this concentration and regrouping, they will be able to start offensive operation in direction of Kislovka-Kotlerovka and to attack the Ukrainian positions behind. So basically this is the cauldron. Furthermore, don't forget that 3 weeks ago, we got update that the Russians launch offensive operation in Ivanovka and Stepovo-Novosilovka. At least as according to some results, according to some updates, that wasn't confirmed by any video geolocation, the Russians managed to establish control over Ivanovka. There were no updates about Stepovo-Novoselovka, but anyway, we understand that from Ivanovka the Russians have already established de facto control over the main supply road that goes from Kupyansk to this bridgehead. So basically the encirclement and cauldron operation of Kislovka-Kotlarovka have been almost completed by the Russians, and I expect that in a day or two we're going to receive more positive news and updates for the Russians regarding this territory. And if Ukrainians lose Kislovka-Kotlarovka foothold, this is going to be collapse of entire front line and entire Ukrainian positions on this side of Oskol River. So this is the situation on this bridgehead between Lyman, Pervosinkovka and Kislovka-Kotlarovka area. Now we're moving to the south. The Ukrainians published the video of another FPV drone strikes, just a regular activity from the Ukrainian side. So we see the Russians give us some activity updates and the Ukrainians publish just another FPV drone strikes. I'm saying this because we see the difference in usage of different types of weapon and different warfare that use the Russians and the Ukrainians. Now we're moving to Lyman area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes on this direction, the Ukrainians lost 65 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system. The Russians launched offensive operation and made a significant number of attempts to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense belt on the line between Plasyanka and Makiivka. And according to information we have, during the previous 4 days, the Russians have been trying to penetrate this area, but currently they haven't managed to achieve a success. But the Russians are saying that as a result of those attacks, as a result of these clashes, they managed to get very close to Makiivka, that there are just 600 meters between the edge Russian positions in Makiivka, and that Makiivka is under complete Russian fire control, so that the Russians have their positions right here, and they attacking and ruining the city with the tanks attacks. They don't need even artillery for this purpose and so on. But there is one important thing that we need to discuss, because the Ukrainian sources, after the Russians published all these updates about the significant results in Makiivka as well, but Makiivka hasn't fallen yet, and the Ukrainians published the video of the battle for Makiivka, let's call it like this. So some episode of clashes for this area, and this is geolocated video, and this video we got today, and this video shows the Russian attempt to attack Makiivka from these positions with tank. We see how the Russian T-90 tank within a distance of few kilometers was attacking the Ukrainian positions in Makiivka. Maybe he was trying to suppress the fire positions. Anyway, basically and simply say, he was trying to reduce Makiivka till ruins. But at some point of that operation, the Ukrainians launched anti-tank missile, and as a result of that, T-90 tank was destroyed. And this is very important, very interesting update, because this Russian source that published that, Ukrainian source that published this video, reported that the forces of 66 mechanized brigade managed to repel that Russian attack, and furthermore, that Ukrainian sources reported that those attacks took around 4 days. And that Ukrainian resource reported that as a result of those clashes that took place that been taken for around 4 days, the Ukrainians managed to destroy for 4 days up to 25 Russian armored vehicles. We have from the Ukrainian sources just one geolocation from this area, just about 1 tank, but the Ukrainians are saying that there were around 25 tanks. Of course, it's up to you to believe or not, because from one side we believe the Russian words on Kupyansk Lyman, so it's up to you to believe or not about destroyed 25 Russian tanks. If you ask my opinion, I don't believe, because if it's true, obviously the Ukrainians would publish more videos of more destroyed tanks from on the line of Makiivka. But anyway, we understand that no matter the situation, no matter the words, the situation in Makiivka is a little bit worse in comparison with the situation on Kislovka-Kotlarovka and Sinkovka on Kupyansk front line. But this obviously also the primary target for the Russians, to penetrate this defense belt and to force the Ukrainians to step back from the Russian side of Zhiribets river. Also, there are very heavy artillery duels in Kremenaya forest, but without any changes on the ground. Now we're moving to Seversk direction. The Russians have intensified their activity in this area as well. Currently, the Russians are trying to storm and attack the Ukrainian positions in Sporne. They're attacking this area from many directions, but currently they try to suppress and destroy the Ukrainian positions in the city using FPV drones, using artillery strikes, and so on. Today, the Russians published significant number of videos of FPV and drone bombings and shellings of Ukrainian forces, and we got another FPV drone strike against the Ukrainian trenches somewhere behind Sporne. Obviously, the Russians are trying to capture the city, to penetrate and to give the final solution of this area, because meanwhile, while the Russians are storming Sporne, the second Russian group, the second Russian squad, tried to storm the Ukrainian positions along the railways. They are moving from Bilogorovka along the railways in direction of the city by the village by the name of Avdiivka. This is the only secure way for the Russians to move along the railways, and they published like a lot of videos, the Russians, of artillery superiority, of artillery attacks, of artillery preparation, how the Russians were bombing trenches, how the Russians were bombing shelters, how the Russians were making artillery preparation, basically how the Russians started their offensive operation in the direction of Seversk along the railways. And according to all these updates, we understand that the main purpose and the main goal of the Russians is to establish control, at least at first phase of this operation, to establish control over these territories. So this is the main goal, and this will allow the Russians to get as close as possible to the cities by the name of Ivano-Daryevka and the city by the name of Avdiivka. And this is going to be the next defense belt of Ukrainian forces that the Russians will fight for. And anyway, this is much closer to Seversk, and obviously the Ukrainians don't have normal positions in Avdiivka and Ivano-Daryevka. These are also small villages, and the Russians do have possibilities to bypass them with the very powerful armored fist pressure and to move further to Seversk. So this is the direction, and when talking about the global scope, the Russians are trying to move like this one. Furthermore, they will be able, of course, to collapse Vesele and Razdolovka. So the clashes in this direction are going to intensify every single day. When talking about Artyomovsk Bakhmut direction, we haven't received nothing from this area, just few geolocations, how the Russians managed to track and discover the movements and redeployments of Ukrainian forces among the tree lines. And as a result of artillery strikes and bombings, the Ukrainians were stretched their forces and were forced to step back. There are no changes, there are no attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack, to cross the railways. Basically, the Ukrainians stopped and they don't have power to attack. They can't proceed defense operation and offensive operation, and currently they took a decision to concentrate on defense on Kupyansk, Lyman and other directions that were coming to. According to the Ministry of Defense, when talking about the Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 165 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles, so the level of losses is not so heavy. And as I understand, mainly this situation is connected with complete absence of attempt from the Ukrainian side to attack in direction of Klishchiivka. When talking about Avdiivka area, the Russians also activated their movements. I'll remind you that recently, according to some information, the Wagner group was redeployed in this area exactly to storm and to capture Avdiivka. What we have from this direction? The most important updates are coming from the northern area from Krasnogorovka. As you can see, I have updated this map. Today, the Ukrainians published the video how they were bombing and attacking the Russian positions using FPV drones. And we are using this video just to geolocate the edge Russian positions. And currently, the edge Russian positions goes along the railways. So I have updated the map. But the most important updates are coming from the line between Vadiana and Tonenka. From this direction, the Russians launch a very powerful offensive operation through the fields to the north in direction of Tonenka and Severne. Now we haven't received even a single geolocated video about that attack, but as I understand, tomorrow or the day after we're going to start receiving the videos of this attack. The only thing we have is significant number of updates and videos of artillery preparation. The Russians were bombing this territory with all types of weapons they have. Maybe this is exactly the direction where Wagners are going to attack, who knows, but for example, for today we got 4 or 5 videos how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian trenches and and fortifications and shelters along this tree line. Basically, the Russians were trying to penetrate, to suppress the Ukrainians, not to allow them to concentrate, not to allow them even to raise their heads. And after that powerful artillery preparation, the Russians launch attack. But one more time, we haven't received even a single geolocated video confirmation of movements of tanks. And this is very interesting and very weird, because if the Russians were defeated, obviously the Ukrainians would publish the videos as they did in the vicinity of Makeyevka. But now we haven't received nothing, so maybe there is a situation like 50-50. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to break, but the clashes still continue in this area. So we'll follow this situation. And the most important that we need to mention and to pay attention to is that these are not the first videos from this direction. If you remember, if we increase the number of updates from the 1st of October, we're gonna see that the Russians are pretty concentrated in this area. The Russians were bombing this area not just with artillery, but also with FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian shelters and forces in the trenches. The Russians suppressed and destroyed significant number of artillery systems, destroyed a lot of ammo depots, and of course they suppressed a lot of mortar positions and fire anti-tank positions and so on. So the preparation for that attack started somewhere on the 1st of October, and after 7 days of all this activity, the Russians launched an attack. And obviously we understand that the most important and the target and the main goal of the Russians is to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense belt and somehow to establish control over this small triangle, let's call it like this. And if they're able to do this, of course, Avdiivka is collapsed automatically. Now we are moving to the south Donetsk direction. We got also a lot of updates from the area of Vuhledar. There are no activity, but the events that are taking place in this area tell us that the Russians also launched something like artillery aviation preparation before another attempt to attack the Ukrainians in direction of Vuhledar and Vadiana. On these videos we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian trenches, the Ukrainian positions. The Russians have already cut the Ukrainian forces in these three lines from the main line in the coal mines, and so that means that very soon they're going to attack in this direction, obviously. So these are the area of concentration of Ukrainian forces, but the main reserves they're receiving from this coal mine, and the Russians were bombing this coal mine as well, trying to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities, not to allow the commanders of this area to send reinforcements to those three lines. So I expect some clashes among these three lines as well, and some Russian progress also. When talking about Avdiivka tactical bridgehead, we have some updates from this territory, and the most important are coming from Robotyne. The Russians are reducing till ruins this village heavily with all types of weapons they have. It's very difficult to understand the real Russian purposes and goals on this direction, but the destiny of this city is worse even the destiny of Marinka, because the Marinka has been reducing since the beginning of 2014, but when talking Robotyne became Marinka just for the previous few weeks. And the question is, what is the purpose of the Russians to reduce the city till ruins? Of course, from one side, we can say that the Russians are trying to prevent the Ukrainian concentration of forces. From the other side, we understand maybe the Russians are planning to counterattack. But if they're planning to counterattack, why they're destroying the fortifications? If we increase the number of days since the 1st of October, we see how strong the Russians are active and focused in this area. Almost every single square meter was under very heavy Russian fire. Maybe there are a lot of Ukrainians, who knows, but now we don't have more updates and details about the situation in this area. Very interesting updates are coming from Gulyai Pole. The Russians, as a result of local offensive operation in this area, managed to capture a few trenches and to get very close to the city by the name of Chervona. At least some sources are saying about this. I don't think that the Russians are launching greatest offensive operation in this direction. As I understand, according to the Russian pattern, they're trying to maintain the gray zone and to reduce the positions between Russian and Ukrainian forces, and not to attack, but to prevent and to reduce the Ukrainian chances for the Ukrainian counterattack. So usually the Russians act like this when they know and expect the Ukrainian offensive operation. So maybe soon we are going to see some activation of the Ukrainians on this line. Very important updates are coming from Robotyne area. The Russians reported about not very heavy losses from the Ukrainian side, just 30. When talking about South Donetsk, we missed that information. The Ukrainians lost 185 soldiers. On this area, the Russians launched counteroffensive. Significant number of counteroffensive, and currently the most important target for the Russians is to return control over Robotyne. This city is under very heavy fire and attack from the Russian side from many directions. Mainly the Russians are attacking this city from the south, from the west, and from the southwest. And today they're using like mechanized armored fists from the southwest and the west, and infantry just from the south. Today we got some videos from the Ukrainian sources. They published the failed Russian attack. And the Russians were using significant number of tanks, armored vehicles. They were moving to attack the trenches, trying to force the Ukrainians to step back. But the Ukrainians used a few times successfully the FPV drones, and as a result of those strikes, few Russian tanks were destroyed in this direction. But those were just few tanks. But we understand the most important is not, as you can see, the crew managed to survive. The most important is not that the Ukrainians managed to destroy a few tanks. It's a normal situation when somebody attacks and when somebody defend themselves. The most important is that the Russians launch this counteroffensive. That means that Ukrainians are no longer able to attack and continue offensive operation to Novoprokopovka, and the only thing they can do is to defend themselves. And of course the Russians will not allow the Ukrainians to concentrate and to dig in deeper in Robotyne. And if Robotyne falls, imagine yourself what is going to happen between the Ukrainian positions in the field between Robotyne and Verbovo. All this area will be collapsed, and the Ukrainians will be forced to step back towards Novodanilovka and the city by the name of Malotokmachka. Now we're moving to Kherson direction. The Russians reported as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers. And the Russians published another video of attack using the missiles, probably 1,500 FAB bomb on the city of Pridniprovskaya. This is a very important area that Ukrainians use to support their small foothold on the Russian bank of Dnipro River. So they always have some concentration of forces. The Russians control the situation and they allow the Ukrainians to concentrate a little bit, and after that they destroy everything they see. And the most important update is coming from Nikolaev area. The Russians published the video how they managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian S300 air defense system. Significant video. As a result of probably Tornado S system strike, the Russians managed to destroy the complete full division of Ukrainian air defense S300 system. Some specialists have already discussed this area, and as a result of that strike, few launching systems were destroyed, radar was destroyed. So anyway, this is another collapse of air defense positions of the Ukrainians in Nikolaev. If we calculate the distance or approximate distance of attack of the Russian system, the distance is around 92 kilometers. So significant result for the Russian Tornado S system. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.